So let's say you're applying to data analyst jobs and you send applications out to 50 to 100 job postings, and week after week you check your inbox and all you get are rejection emails or nothing at all. You might start wondering, is it me? Is it AI? Or am I just not good enough? Now the truth is probably more simple than that. Your resume isn't communicating the true value of a data analyst. And today I'm going to show you exactly why and how to fix it by giving hiring manager feedback on 3 resumes. One that misses the mark and is barely going to get any responses, another that comes close but is still missing something essential, and the last one is a standout resume by one of my students, which then eventually turned into an interview that became a data analyst offer at a real estate company called JLL. And stick with me because by the end, you'll know exactly how your resume looks from the eyes of a hiring manager, and I can guarantee that if you implement some of the tips that I give you today, you will immediately increase your chances of getting an interview. If you're new here, I'm Christine. I'm a former data director and a hiring manager who now helps people take the most direct path to working a job in data. And on this channel, I share my strategies, frameworks, and mindset tips to help you stand out. Let's dive in. So for those of you guys who are job hunting or about to start job hunting, I have a freebie for you. It's my resume template, which includes some tips about how to restructure your resume bullets so that they actually stand out. So this first resume is by an analyst who's been working as an analyst for a few months, but most of their experience is in portfolio projects or schoolwork. So let's take a look. The summary says strategy-focused data analyst with strong business acumen, hands-on experience in SQL, Power BI, and Excel, and a deep interest in solving business problems or real-world problems. Skilled in data storytelling, KPI tracking, and translating insights into strategic actions. Experience in solving real-world problems using strategic frameworks, forecasting, and performance analytics. Now, the thing is, this bio sounds fine on the surface level, but it doesn't actually say anything about you as a data analyst. It sounds like the most generic narrative that you can have about your experience, and this is what a lot of bios sound like. The bio is an opportunity to show how you are different or how you stand out from other people. So don't just use it to pack in the keywords like real-world problems, strategic frameworks, forecasting, and performance analytics. Think more deeply about what are the skills, personality traits, or industry knowledge that you have that sets you apart. For example, do you have a penchant for creative visualization? Or maybe you have a strong sense of empathy for stakeholder needs because you worked in a client-facing job before. Or maybe you have an extremely strong attention to detail because you worked in a high-pressure environment like law. Think a little bit about how your background or your schoolwork can add to your narrative instead of blending into everyone else. Now, one of the first things I noticed about this resume is that it's 2 pages long, and the second page is really not necessary because there's barely anything on there. If you do not have more than 5 years of relevant data experience, your resume should only be 1 page long. You can see that there's a lot of unused space here. There's negative space in the margins and in the line breaks and in the spaces between every single project. All of that should be condensed so that we can pack this resume in with much, much more detail. Now, going from top to bottom, we have summary, skills, experience, projects, and education. About 30% of this entire resume is spent on summary and skills, and even less than that is on experience. But the number one thing that a hiring manager cares about is your actual work experience. So the more real estate your relevant experience can take up, the better. Ideally, you would have a resume that is about 60% experience, maybe 20% about portfolio projects, and then the other parts are all about the details with your skills, your education, and your contact information. So one of the first things I would do would be to condense the skills and education section. Remove all the line breaks. You don't really need to have all of these things listed. You just need to have your data and visualization skills listed up here and maybe some of the techniques. And then that will save a lot more space so that you can elaborate on the experience. Now, the experience is basically 3 lines long, which is not nearly enough. This should be taking up about 60% of your entire resume. And so this company, Rinda Global, I would put the location and then the actual time on the side here, maybe 1 to 2 summary sentences about what you're doing at this role in a high level, and then detailed bullets. So this bullet says built an Excel-based dashboard to track recruiter target, improving decision-making for department heads. Utilize strong communication skills to effectively engage with candidates and hiring managers throughout the recruitment lifecycle. Now, this sounds pretty business relevant, but it's lacking so much detail. Who were you actually working with? What kind of data were you working in? How large was the data? What are the specific metrics that you were tracking? What insights did you find? And what impact did this analysis actually have? Even if you've only been working at this job for a few months, you can go way more into detail so the hiring manager can see the actual value that you bring to a team. Then if we go down to the project section, so digital marketing campaign analysis, listing the tools, net revenue management, also listing the tools, and e-commerce sales analysis, also listing the tools. Now, one of the first things to mention is that you don't really need to list the tools in the actual project title, just explain the tools that you're using in the actual bullets. So for example, analyze 40 million ad spend to identify cost efficiencies, achieving a $5.71 CPA and optimizing budget allocation, using Power BI and Power Query to build dashboards that investigated blank. Right? So the structure of a bullet that you want to go with is first mentioning the impact or business metric that you were actually looking at, using what kind of tool, then what kind of data set were you using, and who were you looking at this data set for. So for example, this first bullet would say something like, helped achieve a $5.71 CPA and optimize budget allocation by building a marketing dashboard in Power BI. After analyzing $40 million in ad spend to identify cost efficiency, I helped deliver insights on blank to who. It's missing that final impact. Same thing with the second bullet. So delivered actionable insights on campaign performance leading to a 15.48% conversion rate. Instead, start with the metric, right? So helped drive a 15.48% conversion rate on campaign performance by delivering insights on blank and blank. What were the actual insights? What were the metrics? And who were the teams that you were delivering these insights to? Another example is this O-list e-commerce sales analysis. So analyze 100K orders to pinpoint sales channels driving $15.4 million in revenue. Now, these numbers are really high, but there's so little detail behind it that it would actually kind of raise a red flag to a hiring manager, because we'd be wondering, how did you drive $15.4 million in revenue? So make sure to be really careful when you make these kinds of claims. They should be numbers that you can logically explain to someone in an interview about how you actually calculate this value, but you need to be more specific about what your role was. So how did you actually drive that revenue? Was it because you were understanding certain trends and you were making recommendations to the sales and product team? And so then that's some of the context that should be in there. The other thing that all of these bullets are missing is the actual technical tool used to do that analysis. It's listed above, but it's hard to understand which analysis belonged to what tool. So ideally for that second bullet, identify 20% year-over-year growth and linked customer satisfaction score, for example. What tool did you actually do that in, and who did you build these insights for? Lastly, the education section and certifications and casework. Again, see how this takes up about 25% of the entire resume real estate. This should all be consolidated down to just a few lines. So Bachelor of Science and the university. You can see the certifications if they're unique, but do not put the Google Analytics or IBM certification because they're just way too generic and they actually dilute your credibility as a data analyst. So at the bottom, I would just consolidate this to the Bachelor of Science university degree and then maybe that one certification, and that's it. So overall takeaways, if your resume looks like this, make sure to hone your summary so that it's unique and it has a few key phrases that are personal to you. Then also consolidate the skills section so it's much more concise. It should not be taking up more than 15% of your overall resume. The experience section should be expanded to take up around 50 to 60% of the resume. Even if those bullets are all about the same project, it's much more important to be way more detailed than to keep things very high level and sounding generic. And then the projects can also be consolidated. So the project should take up around 20 to 30% of the resume, not more than that, because people care way more about work experience, whether that's paid or unpaid experience, than they do about portfolio projects. And by the way, if you do not have enough experience to fill up 50 to 60% of your resume, it means that you probably need to work your way up into that experience before you apply to these very large corporate data analyst roles. So think a little bit more about, are there organizations that you can volunteer with, or maybe small businesses that you can propose a freelance project to? And you can check out my other video here for more tips on how to do that. So sorry to say, but I would estimate that a resume that looks like this would get around a 0 to 1% conversion rate. So now let's take a look at a resume that does a better job, probably gets around a 2 to 4% conversion rate, but is still missing a few key elements. So let's take a look. We have education at the top, experience, and then selected data science projects and technical capabilities. Now, at a first glance, the formatting is really clean and it's only one page, so good points there. But starting with education is just kind of making it difficult for me to understand who you actually are. So remember that the recruiter or hiring manager is going to be the person who has to advocate for you as you go through the hiring process. So make it easy for them to understand what your story is. You should almost always have a very quick bio or profile at the very top with 1 to 2 sentences that explains what's unique about your experience and how it relates to the roles that you're applying to. So start off with a bio or narrative at the top, and then the education section, you don't need to mention your coursework. So for example, data science coursework and marketing coursework, we can get rid of that to save this space because realistically, people don't really care about what classes you took in school because it doesn't actually say much about what you can do as an analyst. So then the education section will be condensed a little bit, which means that your experience section can expand a little bit as well. Now, one of the first things I notice is the same problem that I mentioned with the first resume. There's a lot of negative space. You should never have that much negative space in your resume because it means that you're losing out on valuable real estate. So let's look at the experience section. We see stars entertainment, analyst, insights and analytics, and then stage publication, so product and strategy analyst. Now, generally, I recommend starting with the actual job titles instead of the company, so to flip the order of these two, especially if you have the word analyst or data in your job title, that is highly relevant. A hiring manager is going to skim your resume for like 7 seconds, and one of the first things they look at is the actual job title, how long you were there for, and then the company. So flip these, say insights and analytics analyst or just insights analyst, and then also say product strategy analyst, and then put the company name under that. I also recommend that for every single job, you have a 1 to 2 sentence summary that just explains at a very high level what you were doing in that role before you dive into the details about your specific projects. So for example, this third bullet, utilize quantitative and qualitative analysis techniques to support data-driven decision-making and responded with accuracy and urgency to a large volume of ad hoc insights requests from internal and external stakeholders. Again, this is very generic. So who are the stakeholders? What are the actual analysis techniques? What is the variety of ad hoc insights and what were those requests? This is kind of just claiming that you are a data analyst instead of showing that you're a data analyst through those actual projects. So this bullet is an example of something that you could use as a starting point for that summary sentence for this job, right? So utilize qualitative and quantitative analysis in blank, in Excel, SQL, and Tableau to support stakeholders in marketing and product, to answer ad hoc questions and reporting requests on blank and blank, and actually include the metrics and the things that they were looking at. And then go into more detail about the actual projects. So for example, let's look at this first bullet. Analyzed stars subscriber level consumer content and product data, including the development of new tables and data fields using SQL, and built multi-dimensional cross-platform performance reports and dashboards using Tableau to track churn, retention, and other KPIs and market performance metrics. Now that is a very long sentence. One test you can do is always read each bullet out loud and ask yourself, is this something that you can easily say in one sentence? If not, it means that it probably should be broken up into 2 different sentences or 2 different bullets. So this seems like something that is highly data relevant because we have the kind of data set, so subscriber level consumer content and product data, which is great, explaining what you were doing in the tool. So development of new tables and data fields using SQL, built multi-dimensional performance reports and dashboards using Tableau. So again, that's great because you're explaining what you actually did in the tool. A lot of times people will just say wrote queries in SQL or built a dashboard in Tableau, but you need to go one level deeper into that and explain more about what those queries were about or what are the tables that you were actually building. And then lastly, we have churn, retention, other KPIs. So this is great that we actually mention the metrics because so many different industries and companies track these same values. So this becomes immediately relevant to a number of different industries. The thing that this bullet is missing is the final impact. So what was the reason for doing this kind of analysis? So we say to track churn and retention, other KPIs, but it would be more impactful to say something like help the marketing team better understand churn and retention by building a performance report in Tableau that tracked blank, right? So always try to bring it back to the actual impact and who you were doing this project for. Let's look at another bullet. So developed and maintained a weekly reporting and KPI dashboard measuring the health of newly launched STAR's international app to support real-time data and actionable insights. This phrase, actionable insights, is so overused. Instead of saying actionable insights, say what the insights actually were and build recommendations like blank. And have a little bit of an explanation about what were those recommendations that you were giving to that team. And don't claim things like you built weekly reporting and KPI dashboards. What was actually in the dashboard? What was the tool that you actually used? And who did it go for? Every bullet ideally would also start with an actual quantified metric. And this doesn't have to be a metric that has to do with business impact, like how much revenue you generated or how much time you saved, but even something like the size of the data set or the number of reports that you built. So for example, developed and maintained 3 weekly reports and KPI dashboards in Tableau that measured the health of newly launched STAR's international apps, including metrics on blank, blank, and blank, and then fix that for any grammatical errors. And then at the bottom here, we have selected data science projects. So NBA team, ticket sales prediction, led a team of 4, analyzed consumer behavior by merging ticket sales datasets with consumer information to build a master file, clean data by removing duplicate or invalid data and transforming missing data. built a logistic regression model using R. Now, again, all of this is great. These are things that many different data analysts and data scientists are able to do these days. The thing that is going to set you apart is being able to explain what the actual impact of that project was. Now, even if that project wasn't done in a company context, you can still say something like the outputs of the model were geared towards this kind of team, or the analysis was built to help a team understand blank, right? So bring it back to the actual stakeholder. And then at the bottom, we have technical capabilities where we're listing all the different skills. Again, this is fine to just leave at the very bottom here. So overall, this resume is on the right track, but I would start with the bio, move education to the bottom, have experience expand so it takes up a little bit more space, have a summary sentence for every single job so that someone can see the high level understanding of what you were doing at that role, and then get a little bit more detailed in the bullets to explain the impact and bring it back to the stakeholder. And finally, let's see the resume that actually landed a job offer. This resume belongs to a student who had applied to actually more than 180 jobs with the before version of their resume. Unfortunately, I don't have that version of the resume to show you guys, but I will show you the Standout Resume that ultimately landed that job as a reliability data analyst at JLL. So this is what the resume looks like. We have a profile that says analyst with Marine Corps trained attention to detail, bringing over 5 years of experience driving significant sales and process improvements, proficient in Excel, SQL, and Tableau, consistently delivering actionable data insights and eye-catching visualizations to both technical and non-technical audiences with a natural ability to cultivate relationships and meaningful connections across all levels of organizational structures. Now that is a bio that is really difficult to forget and is going to be really hard to blend in with anyone else. Even that key phrase, Marine Corps trained attention to detail, other phrases like eye-catching visualizations, technical and non-technical audiences, and natural ability to blank. That all makes it a lot more personal and sound unique to you. Now let's look at the overall real estate. You can see that there's not a lot of negative space on this resume. Every single section is being put to full use. And the experience takes up about 70 to 80% of the entire resume, where everything else is used to just explain education, technical skills, and awards. In the experience section itself, see how we're also using bolding and headers to make specific things stand out. Now, this is one of the ways to make a recruiter's life easy by bolding your actual job title and then bolding the key phrase per bullet, but making sure it's at the front of each bullet so that it doesn't look like a mess. So I'm going to explain this more in a second. So we have special billing technical team lead, sales operations support team lead, and then data analysis and projects and assistant store manager. Now, in the before version of this student's resume, I think we actually had like 5 or 6 different jobs. One of the key things you need to do if you have a variety of different past experiences is you have to pick and choose the ones that are most relevant and think about consolidating them. So for example, if you worked in like TV production, but across 5 different companies, can you consolidate all of these roles to TV production assistant and then list all the different roles underneath as a separate subsection so that it doesn't look like you were working at 5 different places over the past few years? So that was one of the first things that was hurting the student's resume in the before version. The other thing that was hurting the student's resume is that they had different job titles that didn't signify that they were a technical person, that they were lead, or that they were working as an analyst. So just recognize that there's a bit of a gray zone when it comes to job titles. As long as someone can stand by the fact that this job title sounds like it accurately represents what you were doing in that role, then you're good. And you want to gear your job titles to analyst, data, technical roles as much as possible. So for example, if you were a sales and operations associate, but you were doing a lot of analytics, you could reasonably say something like sales and operations analyst, and that immediately makes you more relevant to data analyst roles. So consider whether or not you can make that translation for some of your past experiences. Now when I dive into this first position, so special billing technical team lead, let's read some of the bullets and see what's going on here. Achieved a 12% improvement in meeting performance metrics by leveraging subject matter expertise to support special billing team in completing over 200 customer requests per month. So already it leads with a metric. The key phrase is bolded, explains some of the domains, so meeting performance metrics, and it also explains the team, so special billing team. So the thing that this bullet is missing is the actual technical tool that was being used. So let's look at this last bullet here. Used Excel and NetSuite to analyze daily and monthly metrics for the special billing and billing bundle teams, including cases open, cases closed, and special project status, maintaining updated ad hoc performance reports for daily upper management meetings. Now, even though it doesn't have a quantitative impact in a metric, it has a qualitative impact by explaining that we use this to analyze daily and monthly metrics for the special billing and billing bundle teams, which then went to upper management meetings. So it includes the stakeholder, it includes the technical tool, and it also includes the actual business metrics, cases open, cases closed, and special project status. Now let's look at how this person actually explained their portfolio projects. And this is really important because so many people will position their projects as if they were doing homework or schoolwork, which actually immediately dilutes your credibility as an analyst. So this student put data analysis experience and projects and actually combined their experience from a previous bootcamp with the work that they did in the Analytics Accelerator program. And then they explained e-list e-commerce sales analysis, conducted analysis in Excel and SQL of over 108K e-commerce data records. So again, uses the tool and uses a quantified metric to explain the data set. Extracted insights for sales and marketing teams, stakeholder, including total sales, order counts, and refund rates, metrics, as well as loyalty program performance and product performance. Created dashboards in Excel focusing on sales, marketing, and refund data. So see how this project is actually positioned as if they were doing a project at work. It doesn't say that it was for a very personal or niche project, and it actually brings it back to a stakeholder, even though it was done for a portfolio. So this is something to do in your portfolio projects as well. Think about who would actually be using the results of your analysis, and you can always see that this project was geared towards those specific teams. And then lastly, assistant store manager conducted comprehensive multi-quarter inventory and product analysis in Access and Excel, generating 20% sales growth and 15% waste decrease. Now, one of the things we were debating was whether or not to keep this role on the resume. And ultimately we decided to because it covers an important period of time, 2018 to 2019. And in keeping this in, we made sure to translate that experience to something that was data relevant. So in this case, it was the 20% sales growth and 15% waste decrease. I know this is a little bit tricky. What I would recommend doing here is if you have past roles and you're not sure how to translate what you did to a data context, one of the things you can do is just feed this into ChatGPT and ask it for some starter key phrases for how you would explain this to a data hiring manager on a data resume. So if you're working in any kind of data adjacent role in sales, product marketing, operations, finance, those are all roles that can still be geared towards a data context as long as you're explaining the tools, the stakeholders, and including some of the metrics and KPIs that you are working with. The other thing I want to point out is how this student actually used the real estate on their resume. So the more recent jobs take up a lot of space, right? Special billing technical team lead, sales operations support team lead. The more recent positions should usually take up around like 20 to 30% of that experience section because hiring managers are going to be looking at your more recent experience first. The roles that happened a long time ago, especially as they're less relevant, should always take up the least amount of space, unless, for example, you were working at a very data relevant role a few years ago. In that case, your previous jobs can take up a little bit more space so that you can be more detailed and show those data skills. So ultimately, what makes this resume stand out is a very unique bio, formatting that makes it very easy to see the job titles that you are working in, job titles that directly relate to a technical role, and front-loading every single bullet with a high-level quantitative or qualitative impact that allows someone to immediately see the value that you bring to a team. And this is the difference between being one of many and one that they actually remember and one that they actually want to interview. So to summarize the resume tips that we talked about today, number one, make sure that you're making good use of the real estate. Do not have a lot of negative space because this is a lost opportunity to show more about your experience. Make sure to have a compelling, unique, and personal bio, and also lead with your experience. So don't spend a lot of space talking about your education or your technical skills. Go right into your most relevant work experience. Your work experience should ideally take up around 60% of your resume or more, and your portfolio projects can take up around 20%. For as many bullets as possible, you should mention a data set, a business metric, a qualitative or quantitative impact, a stakeholder, and a little bit of detail about the tools that you actually used. That's it for this video. I hope to see you guys in the next one, and I'll catch you later.